then I was taken up out of my body and kind of shown the choice that I made as a soul to enter what we know as the space-time experience of Earth. And my guides were showing me all of my incarnations, almost like a topographic map. I had gotten access to the Akashic records from that experience, and I was going through my own sort of like timeline, like the bleed over is what we call it sometimes. It's like I'd be walking down New York City and I see a group of people in the distance and I go to reach for my katana and I don't have a sword and I'm like confused. I don't think they're actually past lives. I think they're like parallel dimensional versions of us. Like it's not linear. So I cross over souls all the time wherever I go. I have to it's just like one of my side quests in life. It's like, oh, disembodied soul needs help, bring him to the light. The immortal nature of the soul is real.
I interviewed Luke Kohen about his near-death experience, where he discovered he spent 500 years on the other side learning lessons before coming back to Earth. And since returning from the other side, the veil for him has only lifted even more. I actually think the most interesting parts of his story are what happened after his NDE.
I had a near-death experience in 2020 at the onset of the whole thing that we know that happened on the planet. And I thought that's what I had, but I actually had dengue fever. And so I was in Bali, which was very fortunate for me to be there during that time. And I did the one thing you're not supposed to do on dengue is I fasted, and your platelets start to go down, and you actually need to keep eating. And so I'm like, oh, I got a fever, I'll fast. I'm used to healing myself, and went to go to the bathroom and just completely gone. And I didn't have any tunnel of light, nothing of where I was. I was just there, and then I was gone, and next thing I know, I was traveling back down on like a DMT. I can only describe it as like a DMT light bridge. I had experiences with Bufo a long time ago, so it was like similar. And when I got back in my body, my partner had been pounding on my chest, and she was obviously a mess. She's like, you were gone for like 2 minutes, and totally freaked out. And I just felt completely at peace. I have a weird analogy that I've given people when they ask me about it. It's like, when you unplug the Wi-Fi and you wait like 2 minutes and then you plug it in and the signal's stronger. That's what it was like for me. I felt all this like heavenly energy pouring into my body from wherever I was, and I was in this very peaceful. I had no fear in my system, and I just knew that I needed to go to the hospital. I was like, call an ambulance. So I went to the hospital, and then basically just had a very strong sort of shamanic journey in the hospital from the fever of dengue, and I could see COVID sort of hysteria sweeping the planet from like a very multidimensional perspective, and I was kind of going in and out of what I would call soul memories, like dying from a mortal wound in Scotland, and I'm in a castle and there's a fire and I'm with my wife and child, and then I go back to sleep, and then I wake up and I'm like a child in the slums in Calcutta, and I go back to sleep. And it was like, I feel like whatever that like rush of DMT or whatever happened was like still moving through my system, and then the dengue itself is very kind of shamanic. And so and then I had a channeling from someone after trying to integrate my experience, because when you leave at that level, at time, and this, like I said, this is not my first one, and I've had similar experiences of this nature. The integration can be even more challenging, and so I was kind of like, what's the point? I was just there, and then I was gone, and then I'm back. Like, okay. And then it was just interesting to not have fear in my body while like the whole planet was going into fear. And so that was kind of an interesting thing for me. And one day I went and just kind of rode around my neighborhood on my bike to kind of integrate. I got my the purple in my legs left from, I healed because my legs were like purple from the platelet thing. And I was just kept asking. I was in this inquiry of like, what's the point? What was the point? What's the point? And I thought of a really dear brother of mine who's seen me through some big initiations and vice versa. And when I thought of him, my heart opened, and I had this flood of gratitude. And I was like, oh, we're here for each other. Why we're on the planet is to hold a field for the collective shift in consciousness that's happening. And I'm like, oh, that's why I'm okay. It's like, duh, but like I felt the return of that answer from a genuine place. And I just had so much gratitude. And then I had a channeling from this woman who That's one of the things she does. She was someone that I trust in that way. I don't trust all channelers, just to clarify. Not all channelers are created equal. And she was like, you had your memory wiped. You went and did 500 years of off-planet, like, training and other things, got all that information and lived experience from your soul, and came back with it for this next wave of work in the world. So that in that 2 minutes, because when you step out of space-time, it's a different, configuration of reality. And so according to the channel, I had done like 500 Earth years worth of experience in the 2 minutes that I was gone. And it moved me. Like when I listened back to the channel, I started crying. I started feeling like what had actually shifted in my being, even though I had no memory of it. Like I was fundamentally different after this experience, just on a very, like, there was much less, like I didn't have fear for most of that time. Like I still experience, waves of anxiety or some fear or some doubts. That I'm a human being, even though I have the tools. It doesn't mean that I don't experience those things, but it was like something really shifted in terms of how I experienced fear in my body after that. And this sort of sense of, I guess you could say Christ-like energy. It's like a golden, pure love, Christic kind of energy that was coming down. I get that when I do healing work. Sometimes I can feel this kind of heavenly energy pouring in through me and my heart, and the quality of the love and the quality of the of presence and stillness and peace that's there. I've had mentors kind of explain to me the ascension time that we're in, and how, in other lifetimes, sometimes we have to die to learn our lessons. Like our personality can't grow anymore. It has to, it's like, sorry, can't learn any more lessons this incarnation, time to die. And then you go to your next incarnation so you can, but if you're willing to keep learning and like actually evolving, it's like a rapid fire time that we're in, where you can go through initiations like week to week, month to month, like rapidly as a soul, if you're really committed to that work, and how we don't need to experience the same level of like death to learn a lesson. And so there was something integrated for me when I got that perspective that I hadn't thought about in a while, but since I had like left my body for 2 minutes and had that near-death experience of like, okay, well, I died, but I technically didn't remain dead. So what's the next set of lessons here? And really go into that kind of inquiry. So that's feels like everything that feels true to share around that experience so far.
Wow. And do you know why you didn't remember those 500 years?
I think it's just a lot for, like, there's the difference between our personality and our spirit and our soul. And I don't think I would have gotten what I needed to get if I had retained that, like, initially. It's similar to, like, a lot of us do work when we dream at night. We go places, we study with master beings, we go to other planets, we go on experiences. Sometimes we're just processing subconscious nonsense or collective, whatever. Like, everyone's dreams are different, but there is a version of dreaming that a lot of starseeds, old souls, whatever you want to call, people that are connected at that level. And I've had like memories of those kinds of dreams too, where I'm like in a room and I'm getting like a teaching from like a very high being, and then I wake up and I was like, oh, I felt that and I know that happened, but what was the, and it like slips through your fingers kind of feeling, because the personality could corrupt the information, but it just needs to be in the energy field or in the beingness. The mind doesn't need to have a story around it, right? And so I think that was withheld from me because I just needed the energetic upgrade. It didn't matter about, the other aspects of it. I needed a shift in my own consciousness that I couldn't explain. Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting. When you were in the hospital and you were seeing these, I assume they were your past lives of, what else did you see? That was so interesting to me.
I mean, I've had other experiences that were similar to a near-death experience where I saw a lot of my incarnations kind of simultaneously. It was very overwhelming. In 2011, I was going through a really bad breakup and I was taken up out of my body and kind of shown the choice that I made as a soul to enter what we know as the space-time experience of Earth. And my guides were showing me all of my incarnations, almost like a topographic map. And there was like hundreds of years surrounding one emotion or one soul lesson in like this part of the world and then this over here. And it was just like, yeah, it was very overwhelming, the amount of information. Then when I came back, I had gotten access to the Akashic records from that experience. It was like and I was going through my own sort of like timeline, like the bleed over is what we call it sometimes. It's like I'd be walking down New York City and I see a group of people in the distance and I go to reach for my katana and I don't have a sword and I'm like confused. These like little moments of like integrating. It took me like 2 years to integrate that experience. And I could start to like, if I was sit with a soul or like a client, I could see exactly what their main lesson was in life or their like deepest gift and deepest challenge that they're trying to reconcile, or see their unresolved past lives, that like why they're having issues that are actually coming from like an unresolved experience from a past life. I don't think they're actually past lives. I think they're like parallel dimensional versions of us. Like it's not actually, it's not linear because time is an illusion outside of time. So we experience it in a particular way, but it's actually simultaneous, and just quite multidimensional. So in that way, I'm saying that because I've had a lot of experiences with my past lives, but they were more like emotional or thematic, or I would get pieces and parts, where this was like very specifically like a series of incarnations where I died from fever or like I was dying with the fever involved. And then there was like this sense of what was happening on a planetary level, like because it was like 2 weeks into that whole thing, and I could literally feel it and sense it and see it, like similar in the way that I saw my incarnation, like a black smoke that was traveling to different regions of the planet and bringing like all this fear and chaos, and and then it would go somewhere else, and I like kind of understood what it was. So when I came out of the experience, I wasn't like afraid anymore. So that was also part of my experience when I was in the hospital.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
I have so many questions, like as you're talking, I'm going to have to try and sort them in my head. But going back to when you were talking about in 2011, you saw when your soul chose to come into human form. This is something that people in my comments talk about a lot. And especially a lot of them say, like, I can't believe I chose to do this. That's kind of the sentiment. That's
what did I sign up for?
Yeah, exactly. So can you give me a bit more insight about what that decision is like?
There's some really beautiful indigenous and other sort of creation stories around, the mythology of the star seeds. And Charles Eisenstein has a really beautiful story called the Gathering of the Tribe. And there's like this whole guided meditation where, the youth are coming to a rite of passage in the village, and they sit around the fire, and the elder tells them a story that there's this other planet that's going through a profound change in consciousness, and it's kind of like a rite of passage for their youth, and he gives them all the information about Earth. There's two things. You may forget where you come from, but you won't be alone. And he says, how many of you are willing to go and help? And all the teenagers, they're rite of passage, so they're like, yeah, sign me up, I'll go. And then the shaman comes and brings the pipe, and they smoke, and they go into a deep sleep, and then they wake up on Earth. It's a beautiful analogy. It's not necessarily literal, but it could be. That's the beauty with myth, is literal and metaphorical get to dance. And a lot of these tribes have this mythology of the starseed of the many beings that come from the stars, and that we take a human form. I think there's a lot of different dimensional expressions. Some people are like, they were like an air elemental in some other version of them. They're like, oh my God, that's like an air elemental in a human body. Like they have a really hard time grounding and like just need to be out in nature all day. It's like all these different archetypes, and it's a very sort of far out concept to sort of conventional thinking. When we think in like traditional religions or things of like there's one God and then you have a soul, but like that our soul actually travels through these different types of initiatory mystery school lineages, and that there's planets dedicated to, a type of soul initiation. And so some of us have like an origin point that's not of Earth, where we were created, and Earth is one of our initiatory schools that we've come to learn. And what's unique about Earth in this sort of galactic spiritual perspective is that the chakra system that we have is like 13 different schools. So like each chakra actually has its off-planet sort of origination point, like the heart chakra is from Pleiades, and the third eye is from Sirius. And so like we might have gone into just Sirius A or Sirius B and done some six chakra mastery incarnation there, or gone to just Orion to do like a warrior experience. But in Earth, we have the opportunity to have 13 simultaneously. So this is a multi-dimensional library where you can have rapid fire evolution as a soul and go through multiple mystery schools and multiple lineages simultaneously. And there's also this interesting perspective. I don't know if it was archaics or which sort of simulation theorist. Someone talked about the difference between simultaneous souls and linear souls. And so when I was talking about like how it's all parallel, like I would be considered a simultaneous soul, where I'm having access to all of my incarnations as I've awakened my energy over my lifetime, remembering the different incarnations that I've had. And I've had a lot of very profound mystical experiences since I was very young. And other people they're just really in this life, and it's not better or worse. It's just that's what they want to experience in this particular thing. Those that have simultaneous, though, we often have a lot of responsibility to clean the lineage that we're part, or shift the culture on the planet in a particular way, and that we need those other simultaneous experiences to give us sort of gifts that we couldn't cultivate if we just did one. Like if I bring all the gifts of all my lifetimes as a musician, or all my gifts as a healer, or all my gifts as a qigong master, whatever, that can come into like a blossoming in a particular way because it's needed in the time that we're in right now. Is very, very, very potent moment for our Earth's history and for humanity.
That's something I hear echoed so much in these interviews, is just how important this moment is where we are right now, and how, like, what a turning point it is for humanity. So it's interesting to hear you say that too. You've had 3 near-death experiences. Did you start becoming spiritual after your first near-death experience, or how did that journey start?
Well, I'm gonna share a very cliche statement first, just to clarify if I became spiritual. We're inherently spiritual, having a human experience. This is like very cliche, but just to clarify. I had a near-death experience when I was 4 from anaphylactic shock from an antibiotic. So I was basically, my respiratory system shut down, and I had to get rushed to the hospital and pumped full of steroids. And years later, I realized that I had a massive interfacing with the Arcturians during this time, that they were working with my consciousness, and I was aware of like how much bigger I was than my body. So I'm 4, and I was very in my body. I was like this, little spunky, curly-haired, kid running around, very oriented to my reality. But I also, I would see spirits sometimes. I would see things. I already had that online as a kid. And then when this happened, it was like, I remember being like, oh, I'm not my body. I'm in my body. I'm so much bigger than I'm overwhelmingly, oh my God, I can't handle how big I actually am. Like at 4. Yeah.
And how were those other 2 near-death experiences different, or how did they shape your life?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think each time that I've experienced it, I've come to appreciate. Well, when you're 4, you don't have cognition yet. Your cognition turns on at 5. So for me, it was quite traumatic to have this like extremely spiritual, expansive disorienting, confusing, confronting, also slightly magical experience at that age. So like I had a way to sense make it. Yeah, the other experience, I feel like, again, it just reminded me that I'm a soul and not a personality. I'm a soul having a human incarnation. And with that, there's more gratitude, there's more reverence, there's more of a desire to be in the river of life, as opposed to being distracted by the myriads of things that we can give our energy to. Like, what does it look like to actually commit to your spirituality fully, and to make that a priority if that's why we're here, is to evolve. And eventually we learn how to be more and more just human, because that's why we're here, is to be human. So once even you wake up all these multidimensional gifts, and you get very tapped into the spirit, and you still have to learn how to relate and make money and be in a body and take care of yourself and run a business. That's hard for sensitive multidimensional people, creative people like ourselves. So for me, the more that I have evolved, it's been more of like, how can I just make peace with the fact that I'm here in this body? And even though my proclivity is much more naturally towards the mystical and the unseen, like I have a very deep relationship with the unseen, and that was like the last one. It was like, if there was a veil, after that there was no more veil, like veil gone. And so I had to learn how to like really be here in my body with the overwhelming amount of information that's coming to me all the time because of the spiritual dimensions. Like I'll go stay at a hotel, and if I don't like grid my room, I'll wake up in the middle of the night with a soul like standing over me, and I have to cross them over. So I cross over souls all the time wherever I go. I have to like, it's just a thing that I have to, it's just like one of my side quests in life. It's like, oh, disembodied soul, it needs help, bring him to the light. It's not like I'm like, I don't have a career, I don't charge money, I'm not like, not many people know this about me. It's just like part of being, my job description is like crossing souls over sometimes.
I need you to go way more in depth into that, because I'm so interested in that. How did you discover this, that you had to do this?
I trained with a lot of really powerful native healers and elders and mystics in multiple traditions. And when my channeling gifts and my sort of healing work went to a new level, it would show up with clients with their relatives. And it wasn't like I wasn't like a medium in that, like just random people. It's just every now and then, very selectively, unbeknownst to me, a very higher vibrational relative would come through with a message, and they needed it. They just, like, the person needed it. And then other times, every now and then, like 1 out of 100 clients or whatever, like, for example, I'll give you an example. I had a client who became an alcoholic after his uncle died. His uncle was an alcoholic. I found his uncle's spirit in his field because he was the brightest one in the family, and they had a very special relationship. That was the first time I crossed a soul over. Was his uncle needed something, he couldn't go because there was something unresolved. He was stuck between the dimensions. The nephew needed to like reconcile something, and then I was intuitively guided, because I learned from my teacher how to do it, but I had never done it yet. Like metaphorically, this is how the invocation you use. It feels kind of like this, and then like I was finding myself doing it, and I could feel it, and like the quality of the tears that emerged through my client, and just the feeling of gratitude that I could feel from this soul. It was like a palpable, felt sense of this other being, like communicating. And when they crossed over, alcoholism disappeared. He had no more cravings for alcohol once we crossed his uncle over, and so I'm like, that's very interesting. And so then I would like check for different things. Like I have like a protocol that I go through of like, is this a subconscious belief? Is this a past life thing? Is this a karmic wound? This is the modality that I learned. And every now and then, disembodied soul is in your field, because they were like in ceremony somewhere or taking mushrooms at a festival, and like there's departed people there and wandered into their field because they're a bright light, because they're looking to go home, and so they'll find a light worker. So some people are like carrying around these disembodied souls and don't know it. And when we do a session, if there happens to be some, that's how I started. And then they would just come to me like all the time. It just, when I'm in places, like I go to a lot of really interesting ancient sites and old buildings, and I've had a really trippy experience in Colorado where, because I do land clearings too, where we crossed over, I think I crossed over 347 souls, and they'd all been murdered. Every single one of them was like women and children that were trafficked. But once they crossed over, it was like all that darkness turned into light, and this building became like a temple. It was like once we transmuted all the energy and we crossed all the souls over, it was like there was peace. It was a reconciliation, and that building became re-sanctified as like a sacred place, and it's like a healing center now in Colorado. It used to be like, it's been all these different things. It was like a gas station, it was a restaurant, it was like, it's got a wild history, but at one point it was being used for a very dark purpose. So it was like, sometimes even buildings have a kind of soul. They have like a blueprint to it. Other buildings are just, meaningless, but some of them that have history, it's because of the point of land that they're on is it's a ley line, or the people that built it were masons. Like, there's tons of different reasons why some buildings have this kind of almost like personality, which is interesting. But that's a story for another day.
That is interesting. I'm sure a lot of people watching this can relate to walking into a space and just feeling a very strong energy.
Vibes off.
Exactly.
Yeah. Or vibes on and someone just needs help. Like, one of the first times this really started happening to me, I was in a hot spring and I felt someone grab my ankle, like from underneath, like fully. And I tuned in, and I have the tools that I use to ask questions. And there was 9 souls that had been killed at this hot spring, native beings. And that was one of the first times I started crossing groups over. And it's just like, to me, it's like any intuitive muscle when we develop it. It's just a muscle you develop, and you learn how to notice certain things. Oh, this is what a psychic dagger feels like. This is when people feel threatened, they send them out, and this is what this feels like. And your energy sensitivity starts to become attuned to these different kind of flavors and frequencies of energy and how they manifest. And so a departed soul has a very specific energy signature. Now you have departed souls that are lost between realms, and then you have very high vibrational, like, I've lost friends that went fully into like their angel form once they die, and they're like working on all our friends. They're like coming to everyone in their dreams, and they're just like, yo, I'm on the other side, and like it's lit, and like I get to help everybody, and they're like fully in their angel body. And it's very different than like a lost departed soul. Like they go into their angelic nature once they leave their body, because that's where they come. They're actually an angelic being having a human experience. So there's different flavors and frequencies: angelic energy, ancestral energy, entities, demonic energies, harmonic. Like, there's such a plethora of multidimensional things that are out there, and how to protect yourself and how to deal with those things. There's a lot of like mental riffraff and ideas about it, and some, in this new age, there's a lot of BS and distorted, people that think they're channeling the Pleiadians, but it's like actually like really dark off-planet energy, so it takes a lot of discernment, but also practice and initiation. So I feel really fortunate that I've had some incredible teachers, real masters that I studied with.
Do you have connection with guides?
Yeah, my guides first came to me when I was a kid, and then they left for years, and then they came back, and they come like, it's funny, like since I left Bali, I think actually after the near-death experience, like they'll talk very, 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 very seldom. They're like, you're grown up, make your own decisions. I'm like, come on, guys. They're like, no, just get out of your head, trust your sacral, trust your heart. You don't need us anymore, really, right now. Well, if you need us, we'll be there. And I'm like, thanks. But for years I had a lot of support. My guides really started coming in 2011 when I had that experience, when they took me out of body to that point. That's where, from there on, it was like they work with me in sessions. That's the main ways that they work with me is when I work with other people. That's when I hear them the most now. They used to be like, I used to get messages all the time for my own evolution, but now it's like, they're like, you're good. You're like where you need to be. Just get out of your head and you'll make the right decision. So, yeah. How
do you, when you're working with clients, hear from them? Do you auditorily hear, or is it kind of more like a knowing?
I'm definitely more of a knower. I'll get images too. I'll get messages. again, like I said, it's like different muscles, right? So there's a natural orientation that happens, just like you can go develop a certain set of muscles in the gym. Same thing with our intuitive capacities. We all have innate intuitive capacities that we can develop, and where I've always been more of like a knower. I'll get visions, but I'm not like, it's not like I see auras or see guides. You know, Barbara Brennan had that gift to actually see people's energy field, and like I'll get imprints, like I'll see it internally, but I won't see it like the manifestation of it in the same way. Sometimes I'll hear things. So, but my main intuitive thing is just the knowing, and then I've gotten really locked in with my. I used to work with a pendulum for years, and then it became muscle testing, and I've had a whole, it's been 20 years now, so I just really trust myself, and I haven't, with most of the people I've served, I haven't, you can't make some of the stuff, you just can't make it up. It's like, how could you possibly know that, So I've learned to see the evidence of my intuition enough times that like I know what it feels like. Yeah.
Interesting. When doing research before this interview, I saw that your guides told you were a bard. Can you describe what that is?
Yeah. So after that near-death experience, so in human design, there's different profiles. I'm a 5-1, so I'm very transpersonal. It's the most transpersonal profile in human design. And as a mystic, even though I don't really like to self-identify as anything, bard is the one thing that I can self-identify with. People have called me a shaman. I don't like that name. I don't self-identify as that. But they're like, if you're confused about who you are or what you are, let's help you. By the way, you're a bard. And I'm like, thanks. So the bard, so the first wave of the bard that I understood was, most people, they think it's medieval times. And the bard would get partitioned or patroned by a wealthy house, and they'd be like, here's a bag of coin and sing a good song about us on your travels, And so the bard would go and they'd sing their one obligatory song, and like, oh, the folks in the south are good and jolly folk, whatever. And then they would tell their mystical stories of like nearly getting robbed in the forest and how they serenaded the bandits, and the bandits were like, we're not going to rob you. You're we like you. Like Robin Hood and the Merry Band, that kind of stuff. They were like musicians. And so people loved the bards because they would bring the good news from kingdom to kingdom. And back then, everyone was living behind the castle walls, which is very metaphoric for today's world of like paradigms. So you get to this castle wall, and people wouldn't leave because you get robbed in the forest. So you stay where your crops are, where your community is, and you don't go beyond the castle wall. So when a bard comes, it's like, oh, news from the outside world, And they would be captivated and present, and the bard would give a transmission, a spiritual teaching, a whole like movie in people's imagination, because we had our imaginations. Books, so many times there was even books. We didn't have Netflix. We had little folklore and some songs, So having a bard was like, it was like your version of like getting like a brand new movie release, like a trilogy show up, So, and then I went deeper and I found out, the bards were a sect of druids, and they had to train for 20 years before they were allowed to give a transmission to the people through sound, storytelling, poetry, and song. And something really woke up in my DNA, because I have Irish and Scottish lineage on top of other lineages, but the Irish one was the one that I felt the most spiritually connected to. Like I never really had, like related to my Judaism so much, or my Italian side, I was like, yeah, I got, growing up in New York, I would like pride myself on a little bit of that, but on the spiritual side, I was like, okay, yeah, there's something in my Celtic lineage that's really deep, both for my soul and my DNA, because my soul ancestry is very I love India and Asia. I'm going to China and Tibet. That's very deep inside of my soul. But on a body level, it was like soul and ancestry with the Druid lines, and I have memories. And so I found out, like, when the Romans were waging their war campaign on the Irish, they came up against the fiercest tribe that they had ever come across. And the front line, that like men and women, first of all, were fighting alongside each other. So women fought, some of them shield maidens, whatever, just fierce women. And then men would like jump over the like, because the Romans were masters of combat. Like they had their little formations and their Iron Age, and were just like, they did their thing. They were really good at killing tribal people. But the Irish would like jump over and like slam through and just like start dicing them up from the inside. And they were like, these people have the strength of 10 men. What the heck? It was like freaked them out a little bit. And they saw on the back of the line this group of beings that were singing. And those were the bards, and the ancestral songs would give the strength to the front line. That strength of 10 men. So the first thing the Romans did to conquer the Celts and the Druids was they waged an assassination campaign on the bards. They took them out one by one. And then they slowly were able to defeat them. And so I was like, well, it's been about 20 years of initiations. I guess it's time to tell my story and start to bring my music back out, because I was a very active musician, and then I put it down for a little bit during my sabbatical, and this ended that sabbatical. So I rebranded and I started to make spoken word and hip hop, and I felt like hip hop was like one of the best mediums to storytell through, to reach the youth and to reach different cultures that I'm connected to and start to tell the mythology again. So, and now I'm starting to play the Angoni more, and just really enjoying singing and storytelling and bringing that archetype really fully through me.
That's awesome. And I love what you said about the bards coming into the castle walls and it being like news from almost another world. I feel like that's very, very on the nose with kind of what you're doing now.
Right. Trying to bridge paradigms. It's like, hey, the guys over there, they're not so bad. They're pretty similar, even though they like a different color party. They're still good human beings, And then I go to the other thing, and they're like, those guys aren't so bad over there either.
You did mention earlier that there's a lot of BS, basically, in the sphere as well. How do we know what theories or advice to believe and what not to believe?
Oh, such a personal journey, because we've been very systematically and intentionally stifled through indoctrination from our current cultures, that we didn't get the rites of passage that we're supposed to get as if we were in tribal cultures. So most people grow up getting indoctrinated by media and culture and family systems, and so their intuition and discernment is not functioning. You make those decisions by your intuition and your discernment. You trust your body, but that you have to develop. Most people are conditioned to be in the mind. And I'd say human design is a good system to start to explore. Gene Keys is a good system to start to explore, to know yourself, to like, oh, what are my shadows and gifts, and how am I designed? Like, how is my bioelectric vehicle within this divine simulation interface with the world and other people? And am I a pure sacral? Am I emotional? Am I, splenic? Like, what am I, a projector? Am I a generator? Knowing that, you can start to move towards a better decision-making process. It's one of the ways. There's a ton of frameworks out there. All of my native friends are like, everything you're told is a lie. Like, most of what we're taught in the West is completely inverted. So just know that. It's like most of it's inverted. And it's usually the opposite is true. Those who win the wars write the history. So like, what's those that lost? What's their perspective, right? So that's worth exploring, and like doing some decolonization of consciousness is important, because a lot of it is like hyper consumeristic, and that consumerism and that individualism is very toxic to the planet, and so it can be very disconnected. So I think people that are overly selling, that are like trying to bedazzle people, are a little bit untrustworthy. They might have gifts, but if it's like too selly, it's like something to look out for. All the mystics that I worked with, I could feel the truth of what they were saying in my body. I could feel their authenticity. They had really good senses of humor and like a quality of innocence simultaneously. So there'd be like this little like grandma who would be like, "Deka, deka, da," and like be like, and then be like, zoom, and you'd be like, whoa. You get this like playful, like almost childlike version, and they would just hit you with something about yourself that you're like, how do you, like, you can't defend against it, because it's just true. You're just like caught off guard. So, it takes time to find, the people that you're meant to work with, but it's a lot of people. It's just it's following the spiritual breadcrumbs. It's like you find one and you're like, oh, good morsel, and then you're like, oh, this one, and you're like, ugh, that one's, there's going to be some trial and error, but anything that's developing your intuition and your discernment, which are actually gateways of the heart, they're not. Discernment isn't up here; it's actually here. It's one of the 12 petals of the heart lotus, if you will. The mind shouldn't be trusted fully. It's great at absorbing information, but we need to develop our emotional bodies and to have a real relationship with our feelings, not in a way that they overtake our reality, but that we're moving emotional energy all the way through. We're not suppressing, we're not denying. That's all important work to develop more intuition and discernment and healing.
Wow. I think that's something I personally want to work on, like trusting that knowing. I think it's important. This channel is about near-death experiences, so I'll ask you maybe a broad question, but I'm interested to know what you'll say. Luke, is death real?
The cliche of death is an illusion, it feels true to say that, but it's also like, the immortal nature of the soul is real. I like Ram Dass and Leary's conversation, Dying to Know, and they kind of talk about death as like the final big psychedelic trip that you're going to go on. So it's good to prepare for it by becoming more and more present, working with your lucid dreaming techniques. How mindful can you become? Because the quality of your consciousness is what you'll experience when you go through that. How many attachments, what you've denied, the trespasses that you've done. So if you can start to do that work, there's a shamanic phrase, or one of my elders said a long time ago. He said, we do this work so that we die before we die. Like how many times can you let go of a version of yourself, of the need to be right, of the need to make others wrong, of any of that stuff that when it comes time, none of that's going to matter. And the more that you hold on to that stuff, the harder it will be when that time comes. So to be able to trust life and to love fully, that's part of our work, and that will make the passage of death an easier transition. I do dark rooms every year, and I take people through dark room initiations, and there's something really powerful in that space because you release DMT there naturally. After 3 days, your brain starts to self secrete, and that's the flood of energy that happens. It's proved that we release it at birth and death. DMT. It's the spirit molecule, and so through meditative cultivation and doing the karmic purifying process, the idea is to be prepared enough to recognize your own mind. This is what the Tibetan Buddhists say. They're like, if you can recognize the projection of your consciousness out when you're in the passage of death, you'll become instantly enlightened. So there's actually a lot of people they train their whole life and then they become enlightened in death. And you'll see a lot of people wait for their deathbed to finally forgive somebody, a relative, finally feel the gratitude for living. Like, why not now, right? So I think death teaches us how to live in more reverence, and the moment we stop denying it, like Castaneda has a whole teaching of like death is one arm's length to your left, always, your entire, like your life, death is right there. And if you can start to respect it, it will give you contrast and reverence and awareness, because a lot of people they don't think about their own mortality. And we have such a death-denying culture. There's no grieving rituals. It's very stale. Most tribal cultures, most cultures of antiquity, it's part of life. Death is part of life. It's not the end, it's a new beginning, right? And so I think as a culture we have a lot of healing to do around death and grief and mourning and reconciling with our own mortality, because I think if we had more reverence, we wouldn't be in the situation that we're in. We would hold living life, this creation, with a lot more reverence.
I absolutely love that. And what would you tell people who fear death?
I think we're actually afraid of fully living. If you're afraid of dying, you're afraid of letting go of control. And so it's find out what you're trying to control. That's going to be the pain point of discovering of what you're avoiding. And if you can get with the material that you're avoiding, you'll have a better life.
It's great advice. Luke, for people who are watching this and want to hear more from you, get in touch with you, what are the best ways for them to do that?
Yeah, I'm launching a free community, so I do two transmissions a month in there. That's starting in August. My Instagram, my Substack, and my music are all Return to the Bard is one of the handles for the Substack, but my website, my music, and my Instagram are all Luke Kohen, and that's Kohen with a K. So Luke, Luke, like Luke Skywalker, Kohen, like the Kohen brothers, but with a K, not a C, and that's me.
Awesome. Well, I'll have all those links in the description as well. And thank you so much, Luke, for this interview.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on.
A huge thank you to Luke Kohen for sharing his story. And thank you for watching this video. Please like and subscribe to our channel. It really helps us share stories like Luke's.